Quite a few of them were, in fact, armed with farm equipment. "What by Camulos is that doing here?" he thought, looking at a small, bald but bearded man holding a long pole topped with a giant cleaver. A whale blubber cutter, if he wasn't mistaken. He hadn't seen one of those for a while, and wanted to ask its owner what it was doing so far inland. But an interest in fishing equipment wouldn't help his battle-hardened warrior image. He pushed out into the open field. Behind Barton's makeshift army, children in rough wool smock frocks ran across the bright field, laughing, fighting, and crying. The elderly sat in groups, complaining about the army's formation and other things that had been better in their day. To the left, sitting in a heap of rags and shunned by all, was the inevitable, drunken old druid, shouting semi-coherently about the imminence of Roman invasion, like all the other dozens of drunken druids that Doug had seen recently. Over by the bridge were those others who escaped military service, Barton's more important families. A couple of them were looking at Doug, perhaps wondering why their expensive mercenary was taking a break. He put his hands on his hips in an overseer pose and tried to look like he was assessing the line for weaknesses. Very important, the rear rank of a defensive line, he'd tell them if they asked afterwards. Doug hadn't expected to be in the Barton army that sunny morning. He'd been stopping in Barton Hill Fort the day before, when word came that the cavalry and chariot sections of King Zadar of Maidon Castle's army would be passing on their way home from sacking the town and hill fort of Boddingham. Boddingham was a smaller settlement than Barton, 40 miles or so northeast along the Ridge Road. It had stopped paying tribute to Maidon. Perhaps Boddingham had felt safe 100 miles from the seat and capital of King Zadar's empire, but along good metalled roads and the hard chalk Ridge Road that was only 3 days' journey for Zadar's chariots and cavalry, less if they pushed it. It would have taken much longer to move a full army, as Doug well understood, having both driven and hindered armies' movements in his time. But everyone Doug had spoken to said that Zadar's relatively small flying squad of horse soldiers was more than capable of obliterating a medium-sized settlement like Boddingham. If that was true, thought Doug, they must be the elite guard of Maca, the war god himself. The Maidon force had passed Barton 2 days before, too set on punishing Boddingham to linger for longer than it took to demand and collect food, water, and beer. Now, though, on the way back, swords bloodied, slaves in tow, the viciously skillful little company might have the time and inclination to take a pop at weak, underprepared Barton. "You!" a man had shouted at Doug the night before. So courteous, these southerners. "Aye," he'd replied. "Know anything about fighting?" You'd think his dented iron helmet, ringmail shirt, and war hammer might have answered that question, but southerners, in Doug's experience, were about as bright as they were polite. "Aye, I'm a warrior." And that was how he'd ended up at the previous night's war council. He'd actually been on his way to sign up with Zadar's army, finally fed up with the strenuous life of a wandering mercenary, but he saw no need to mention that to the Barton defenders. 50 or so of Barton's more important men and women, the same ones who went in the battle line, had been packed into the Barton Longhouse for the war council. Calling it a longhouse was pretentiousness, another southern trait that Doug had noticed. First, it was circular. Second, it was only about 20 paces across. At most it was a medium house. It was just a big hut, really, made of mud, dung, and grass packed into a lattice of twigs between upright poles. 4 wide trunks in the middle supported the conical reed roof. Doug could have shown them how to build a hut the same size without the central supports, thereby freeing up space. Perhaps the hall predated that particular architectural innovation, but there was a wood at the foot of the hill and plenty of people, so rebuilding would have been a dawdle. This tribe, however, was clearly neither architecturally diligent nor building proud. One of the support posts leaned alarmingly, and there was a large, unplanned hole in the roof near the door. At the end of a long, hot day, despite the hole, the air inside was thick and sweaty. It could have done with double ceiling vents.